Session tonight. Um, I speak often at 3 or 4 churches a month. And so I spoke at a church last Sunday, and I'm speaking at one next Sunday. And I had both lessons on the desk at the same time. And at 6:30 in the morning, when I'm leaving, I didn't discover until I got here that I had the Sunday lesson that I gave last weekend, and it was the same lesson you heard in August. So, so I quickly made some notes, and I thought, how perfect, because I had planned on doing a Sunday lesson at some point about the Camino that I was on this last time. But first, I want to share with you that that song was absolutely perfect for the Camino. Both of the songs that you picked. Thank you. But the one of the things that transpired was we started, and I started with a fellow minister from my center in Chico, and she came down with COVID while we were in Amsterdam. In fact, she was coming down with it the day that we left. And so I was left to explore Amsterdam on my own. And the reason we had gone there was because my great grandfather came from Utrecht, which is in Holland, when he was 16 years old and farmed right outside of Chico. And so I wanted to see Holland. And so we went there, and she spent the time in bed. And I got to explore the city. And we did get to see the Anne Frank house. And it is magnificent. If you've never seen it, it is magnificent. And it reminds me very much of the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. But that wasn't why I wanted to talk about Amsterdam. The last day or the second to the last day that we were there, I was exploring, and there was a large square in the section of Amsterdam, and there was a man there who was feeding the pigeons. And he had big sacks of seed on him. And little children would come up, and of course he would put seed in their hand, and they would go over, and some would very carefully stick their hand out and then pull their hands back in because they were afraid to have the pigeon step on their hands. And so as I stood there for probably at least a half an hour and watched him interact with the children and the pigeons, and of course some kids, teenagers, would come by and they'd scream and yelp and shell, and of course then all the pigeons would raise up and circle round and round, and there had to be at least 200 to 300 pigeons in that thing because they were getting fed. And so I finally reached in and I pulled out a euro out of my pocket, and I went over to him and handed it to him, and he said, both hands. And so I gave him both hands, and he filled both hands, and I went over and stood like this. And then when he saw that I was getting out of them, he came over and put it on my head and put it on my shoulders. And so all of a sudden I've got a couple of pigeons on my head and on my shoulders and everything. But he was from Iran, and he wanted to come to America. And so we talked about America, and he said, you know, Americans just aren't what they used to be. They're not as kind as what they once were. And I just kind of thought about that for a while. And of course, he still keeps filling me up with seed to stand their head, shoulders, and things. And he came over to talk to me, and there was another man who was entertainer, street entertainer or whatever, and the guy had been having a hard time. Now, how the pigeon man made his money was by selling seed to parents who wanted their children, or people like me who wanted to feed the pigeons. And this friend of his came up in costume, and Pigeon Man reached into his wallet and pulled out a 10 euros and handed it to him. And he said, what's this for? And he said, I know you've had a rough week and haven't gotten a lot of money, and I want you to have this You need it. And he said, but you've earned that. No, that's yours. That's yours. And he was very insistent that this young man take the money. And yet here they both were street entertainers, so to speak. And he was reaching out, and you know they don't make that much money. And he was reaching out to share his money. And it just came back to me. The old principle is God is our source. God is always our source. But the Camino, how many of you really know what the Camino is all about? And a few, kind of, sort of, maybe. When Jesus died and the 11 disciples were left, Jesus directed all of them to go out into the world and teach the gospel, or teach, he didn't call it the gospel then, but to teach what he was teaching them about love and giving and kindness. And so James, St. James, who was ultimately made a saint, ended up in Spain, what is now Spain, but it was not Spain then. And he had disciples of his own. He wandered all over by the ocean in Santiago, it wasn't named that at that time, but all over Spain, gathering disciples and teaching the word of Jesus. And so ultimately what transpired was he went back to Jerusalem with 2 of his disciples, and Herod beheaded him. And the disciples took his bones and took them back to Spain and buried them in what is now known Santiago. And nothing happened for about 800 or 900 years. And a monk all of a sudden had a dream, and he kept having this reoccurring dream that he could find and know where the bones to St. James were. And so he went on a journey to find the bones of St. James, of which he believed that he did find. And now, of course, the church is located on that in Santiago, has ended up being this huge metropolitan town now besides the old town. But one of the things that transpired out of that was 17 trails from countries all over Europe and just Spain alone. There are 17 trails that come from Belgium and Holland and France and that congregate and end up right there in Santiago. And 10 years ago, I walked the Camino from the French route, which was, I did 400 miles of that in 33 days. But one of the things that transpired for me was I met a man who was 79 years old with his son, and they were from Israel. And we got to sit and talk to him one day. And I was just fascinated with him, and I found out that he was Jewish, and I said, this is a real Catholic kind of thing, a Christian kind of thing. Why are you walking it? And he said, because I can. Because I can. I can walk it because I can. And I put that into my brain, and I thought, I'm going to walk it again. I'm going to come here again and do this again. And so in August, I turned 80. And in September, I walked the Camino, except I walked 2 new trails. And I did it because of what that man had said to me 10 years before. And we walked from Ferrol, which is out by the English Channel. We walked from Ferrol into Santiago, and then we walked from Santiago to Finisterre. And we had probably 5 or 6 days of rain on the 2 trails. And it started out the very second day we were on the trail in the middle of the mountains. And of course, the mountains for us were like mountain, 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 mountain. And you'd get around one mountain and you'd think, oh, I'm done. And there was another, I won't tell you what I called it, mountain for me to climb. And one day that I was in the rain, and of course I had a poncho on to try and protect me from the rain, but we still walked in shorts because the wind and your pants legs would get soaked and et cetera. And it would come in all over my poncho, and then you'd sweat like crazy because the poncho was rubberized and it was hot. And so you were just wet from head to toe. That's the reason for the haircut, too, is I wore a hat the whole time I was gone. But one day, I was just really frustrated with the rain in the mountains, and it was the last mountain. And I don't know how many of you grew up with a little engine that could. And I kept saying to myself, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And all of a sudden, I heard a voice. And the voice said to me, it's not what you've done already, it's what you have left to do. And I knew the voice was not talking about the mountain. I knew the voice was talking about the remainder of my life. And what was I going to do with the remainder of my life? And so over the next 11 days, 10 days, I think it was, we walked an equivalent of about 80 miles. With all of our walking in towns and exploring, we walked around 200 miles in the 22 days that we were gone. Not too shabby for an 80-year-old. And that was we did 7 to 13 miles a day. And before I had left, I had taken a lot of my prayers and my fear to faith and my What Happened to Wisdom Tree and some of my songs, and I had reduced them down to tiny pages. And I laminated all of them. And I laminated them, and I put a hole in them and put them on a hook, and I stuck them on one side of my stick. I had 2 sticks. And on the other side of the stick was about 15 ribbons. And I had sent out my covenant to these 15 people and invited them to walk with me on the journey with the ribbon by stating their name and what it was they wanted me to pray for them. Because I was walking for them as well as myself, and they were walking with me, is the way I approached it. Well, along the way, we met a woman by the name of Rachel. We had stopped at a cafe. We would usually walk from about 8:30, 9 o'clock in the morning to the first cafe, which was usually about 10 to 11 o'clock, and Terry would have some tea. I'd always have a Coke. Gotta get some jazz in me. Gotta get stoked up again. And we'd sometimes get a snack to go with that. And so when we came out of the cafe, there was this wooden pilgrim without a head on, so that you could stick your head on it and have your picture taken. And it had a pilgrim hat, so you could stick that on. And Terry didn't want her picture taken with it. I looked ridiculous, but it was okay. So I put it on, and she took a picture of me, but I took my sticks, and I laid them down on a bench that was maybe about 10 feet from me. And when I turned around after the picture taking and I went to get my sticks, there was this woman, and she was standing there, and she was going through all of my ribbons. And she said, "What is this?" And so I explained to her what I had done and what I had, and why I had done it, and that these people I prayed for every single day that I was on the Camino. And a lot of those people had health issues, cancer, heart issues, and that's why I picked them to go with me, was because when people used to walk the Camino back in 1000 and 2000, it was about 2 things. One, they had done something so egregious that they thought they were going to hell, that if they walked to the Camino, they would be forgiven by God. And the second reason was they had some kind of illness that if they walked it, they would be healed. They believed that they would be healed when they got there. So as she started to walk with us, she wanted to know more about the ribbons and the plastic things that were hanging from my stick. And I explained them to her, and come to find out, she had taken several tours of the Camino and brought people to the Camino to raise money for a liver disease that basically hits young people less than 21 years of age, and if they're lucky, they live to 21 or 22. And her daughter was at home dying from it. And she had to walk the Camino, the shorter, one of the shorter Caminos, just because she needed to get away from that journey with her daughter. And her daughter had walked it with her and her mother and her father 3 times. And if you have walked the Camino, you know that the thing that tells you the direction to go on is a yellow arrow and a scallop shell that's also yellow. And these are typically in the ground, or they're on the 2 trails we were on. They actually had pretty standard concrete type with the 2 symbols encased in them. Well, people come up to those and they put rocks down with people's name on them. They write messages, they leave rosaries, they put pictures of Jesus or Mary. And I always look at the ones where Jesus is crying or Mary is crying, and I kind of go, this person must be in a real big amount of pain. And so Rachel told me that what she always did was she'd made the rocks, or took rocks, and she would put the people who had died before, or people who were trying to be cured now. And as she walked, she would pray for them, and then she would stop and put one on this pillar, sign pillar, and another one there, and another one there. And she said, but I love the ribbons, because you carry them the whole way. And I said, yep, I carry them the whole way. And when we were in Finisterre, which was the second trail we were on, when we were in Finisterre, we went to the Catholic service for the pilgrims that was there. And I went in that night, and you can't just go in and get candles anymore. Now you have to buy them. And so I bought 15 candles. And I put all the ribbons next to those candles, and I lit them. And I did a blessing and a prayer again for them. So that was part of the journey, but in between all that, I kept praying about the message I had received about, okay, God, what am I supposed to do the rest of my life? And so one day I was walking along and I was singing, "O Radiant Christ." Everybody know "O Radiant Christ"? "O Radiant Christ, O Giver of life, I surrender to you." And then you go through body parts that you're surrendering. And I got through mind and eye and voice, and all of a sudden I heard myself saying, "I surrender my life to you." And it was like I stopped dead where I was, and I said, what am I supposed to do? Go back and sell my home and all my belongings like Jesus told that rich man to do? Is that what I'm supposed to do, God? No answer. And so I just kept staying and every time I sang the Radiant Christ, I put my life in there to surrender. So we got we got to Santiago. We were there for 2 days, and then we went out for Finisterre. And I've got a signal that I've already gone 18 minutes, so I'm going to wrap up here.
Keep going, we got nothing else.
No, I asked her to tell me because I try to only speak about 20 to 22 minutes. So a little story about Finisterre.
Which is by the ocean, which means the end of the
You took my words out of my mouth. Thank you. actually, it was the Romans that gave that, and it was based upon Latin. Fin means the end, and stare means the earth. And so Finisterre, and we, that day that we walked clear out to Finisterre, it was a 13.5 mile day. It was the longest day that we walked. And it's at some point that day when we were walking, and this was our last day of walking trails, and at some point on that day, I heard another voice. And this time the voice said, "Do the little things with love. Do the little things with love." And one of the amazing parts about that is when I did a lot of forgiveness every day for me on the trail from the time we'd hit it until we'd stop in the afternoon was spiritual practice for me. So I was doing rosaries, I was doing forgiveness prayers, I was doing releasing prayers, except I couldn't do that with my sticks. So I just would kind of go, I release my need or my belief in, and I release my need to. And what I have noticed since I've gotten home is that the people that irritated me deeply, I'm now reaching out to. And this was not planned. It was not planned at all. And that I just know there's more for me to know about the things that I saw and the things that I did. And I did want to tell you about the pilgrims service in the church there. It was built in this is just outside of Finisterre. It was built in 1200, and it was built just as a simple church. And then 200 years later, in 1400, and then in 1600, it was added onto. Well, we got there and we were sitting there, and all of a sudden there must have been probably about 40 of us that were pilgrims sitting in the church, and this is about 6:30, 7 o'clock at night. And the father, there are two priests, and they come out. One priest is from India. And I was fascinated with the fact that I had, India is typically Hindu and Buddhist, and I was kind of shocked, to see here was this guy from India, and he was the pastor there at the church. And then another guy came out, and he was doing the Camino, and he was a father that was from Poland. Oh, I forgot to tell you about. I'm sorry.
Right, go ahead.
Now I'm going to put a note to myself because I'm going to tell you about the Ukrainians.
We're all ears.
And so, anyway, the father came out and he walked out into the audience and he wanted to know where we all were from. And I'm telling you that we were from Poland, we were from America, Canada, Mexico, Belgium, France. I was just, and I kept track of all the people that I met, and there were 14 people, or I met people from 14 countries and 4 states in the United States. And so after he did that, he said, "Well, I'm gonna do the service in Spanish, but I'll do a little one at the end in English." And so the guy from Poland, he spoke in Polish and did the scripture, and then they had somebody from the audience come up and do something else. And ultimately, he talked about love and changing love within. Now, here, this is after I've already gotten the message that it's the little stuff that I need to do with love. And then at the conclusion of the service, he asked all of us to come up and create a circle around the table, the communion table. And they did serve communion. I went up and got communion. I always say Jesus didn't have any restrictions. I'll take communion wherever I can get it. And so he uh, gave us communion, and then he and the other priest started at one point, and then they went all around the circle, put their hands over our head, and blessed us. And talk about a chill that I got up and down my spine when I was blessed. And so for me, that was like the perfect ending to walking those two trails, to be blessed for having walked that. And then we ended up in Barcelona, where I got to spend 5 hours in the Sagrada Familia. And if you haven't seen pictures of it, please look it up on it was designed by Gaudi, and this is its 100th year of existence. That's how long it's been being built, and it's still not completed yet. It will be completed next year. And one of the things that they were making at that point was the tower, which will be the tower above all, which is Jesus with a very huge star over it, because the other 4 towers are about the passion and the resurrection. No, it's the passion. I can't remember. It's not the Is it resurrection? I don't think it's resurrection, but I know the one I went up in was the passion. But the tower that was there that's going up now has a huge star at the top of it. It's the Tower of Jesus. And what's amazing is when Gaudi designed it, he made it shorter than the tallest mountain in Spain, because the only thing that is perfect is God. I'll answer any questions you may have, if you want to have questions, but that's my journey in a nutshell.
What were you going to tell us about the Ukrainians?
Oh, thank you for reminding me of that. Spain has a habit of closing down their restaurants at about 4:00 in the afternoon till 7 or 8 o'clock at night. And neither Terry and I like to eat at 7 and 8 o'clock at night. So we would always find a restaurant between about 3 and 4, so that then when we got to our hotel, if we weren't already there, or our place that we were staying, bed and breakfast, that we would, we had that, and then we'd go to our up to our rooms, or our room. And so one night we had stopped while we were walking, knowing that we wouldn't get to the town we were supposed to be in time to get dinner. And so we went into this restaurant, and we asked a guy from Germany if he'd like to sit with us. And so we sat and talked about it, and it was about his 5th time on the trail. Terry had walked 7 by the time we ended up on this trail. This was just my 3rd trail and 2nd time. And we acknowledged them, and there was a group of young women, probably early 20s, and there had to be at least 12 or 13 of them. And they were at a long table. And so I stopped and I said, "Where are you guys from?" And they said, "Ukraine." I said, "Ukraine? Don't you have a war going on?" "Oh, yeah, we got a war going on." I said, "Well, is it kind of centralized, or is it all over now?" "Oh, it's all over now." And I was floored that they got out, that they could get out of there and come to walk the Camino. Well, they only got 5 days to walk the Camino, because of the travel to and the travel, because of their jobs. But we continued to see them in those 5 days, off and on the trail. And we'd always wave, or we'd see them in a cafe, and we'd talk to them. And the spirit of those people who are living in tragedy and terror is unbelievable. And I got God bumps all up and down me just saying that. Because to me, they were courageous. Anybody who walks the Camino is courageous in my book. But they were courageous for what they had to do to get there, to be able to walk this and make that happen. So that was another lesson, was nothing is bigger than what we can handle with God. So if you've got questions, I'd be glad to answer. Otherwise, that's my Sunday lesson that you weren't gonna get.